52 minutes was all it took for this jury to come back with a conviction of first-degree murder charges against both suspects in this case. And while the defense argued that there were no real eyewitnesses here, that there was no solid identification on the shooter, keep in mind that that victim's 11-year-old boy was in the backseat of the car at the time of his mother's murder.
I cannot wait to hold that little boy and tell him that the people who murdered his mother have been held accountable.
Family members say when her son learned of Racheal King's murder, he said over and over, his mom was good and kind and didn't deserve that. The 11-year-old boy was in the back seat of his mother's car when Racheal King shot King 6 times. He didn't know Racheal. He was hired by Julie Jean. It was her obsession with a man who chose Racheal King over her that fueled the murder. In closing statements, DA Kevin Steele told the jury, vengeance is a terrible thing. But in this case, it was deadly.
We are so thankful for all the hard work that paid off by everyone in this department. The DA's office, just incredible. We're thankful to God for just giving us the strength to go through this.
Racheal's parents both looked at the convicted killers, telling them that they stole from them. Yet they had no choice but to forgive them. And they hope someday they'll put their lives on a better path.
There really were no winners today. This was not a winning situation at all. My daughter is gone. This does not bring her back. We're glad to have memories of her, but my heart grieves, aches.
Racheal King and Julie Jean offered no reaction, no testimony after the verdict was read, and they did not speak up for themselves in sentencing here. Both now sentenced to life in prison without parole and additional years tacked on to that sentence for the other crimes, including.
It was just after 7 in the morning when the stillness of a Philadelphia suburb was shattered. The streets were quiet, the air heavy with the smell of fresh coffee and car exhaust. Parents were beginning their school runs, children still rubbing sleep from their eyes. To anyone driving by, it looked like an ordinary morning. But at the Dunkin Donuts drive-thru, a scene was unfolding that would become the stuff of nightmares. A silver SUV idled in line, its brake lights glowing faintly against the soft gray of dawn. Inside sat a woman, her son strapped into the back seat, a backpack beside him. To the outside world, they were just another family waiting for breakfast before school. But then, the calm was broken by a flash, a single crack that ripped through the air. Witnesses later said it didn't sound like a firework, didn't sound like anything they could quite place, until the second shot came. And then another. In the driver's seat, the woman slumped forward, her life extinguished in an instant. Her car, now a silent coffin, rolled slightly, nudging the bumper ahead. Her son, only 11 years old, watched it all unfold from mere feet away. There were no words. No cries. Just shock, and then chaos. Cars screeched as bystanders realized what had just happened. Someone screamed for help. Another dialed 911. The silver getaway vehicle peeled away into the distance, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. What no one knew in those first frantic moments was that this was not a random act of violence. It was a carefully chosen target, a deliberate execution carried out in front of a child. The victim was Racheal King, a beloved teacher, a mother, a woman with dreams and a community that adored her. Her death would reveal a story of jealousy, betrayal, and obsession. A story that began long before that morning in April, woven through secret relationships, hidden tensions, and a plan so ruthless that it shocked even hardened investigators. This is not just the story of a murder. It is the story of how a life dedicated to nurturing others was violently cut short in a moment of cruelty. It is the story of a family torn apart, a community left reeling, and a legal battle that exposed the darkest corners of love and revenge. And it all began with the sound of gunfire in the most ordinary of places, a drive-thru where a mother and her son had only been waiting for coffee. Before she became a headline, before her name was whispered with grief in courtrooms and classrooms, Racheal King was simply known as Miss King, the teacher with the warm smile and the gentle voice. For nearly a decade, she poured her life into Grover Cleveland Elementary School, a neighborhood school in Philadelphia. Students remember her as patient, encouraging, the kind of teacher who didn't just assign lessons but nurtured confidence. Parents trusted her, children adored her, colleagues respected her. Teaching wasn't just her profession, it was her calling. Outside the classroom, she was a mother first. Her son was her world, a boy with a bright future and the kind of laughter that could make even the most stressful day feel lighter. Racheal's life wasn't extravagant. It wasn't glamorous. But it was steady, built on small joys, family moments, teaching successes, and the simple rhythm of everyday life. But in the shadows of her quiet, respectable existence, a dangerous storm was building. At the center of it all was a tangled relationship, one that began as companionship, maybe even affection, but quickly twisted into something far darker. The name that would later appear in court documents was Julie Jean. To the outside world, Julie was another woman living in the city, but behind closed doors she carried bitterness, jealousy, and a festering obsession. Julie's life had crossed paths with Racheal's through a man they both knew. A man who, according to investigators, had been romantically involved with both women at different times. What began as a private matter of love and betrayal soon hardened into hatred. For Julie, there seemed to be no moving on, no acceptance. What should have been the end of a failed affair became the beginning of a dangerous fixation. And, as prosecutors would later argue, Julie found someone willing to act on that obsession, a man named Racheal King. Al-Hakim's name, too, was no stranger to law enforcement. A man with a troubled past, a criminal record, and a reputation for violence, he was, in the eyes of police, the perfect triggerman. His weapon of choice was a ghost gun, untraceable, unregistered, a weapon designed for the shadows. And so, in the lives of three people, a teacher, a jealous ex-lover, and a man with a gun, the threads of tragedy began to weave together. Racheal herself had no idea how close the danger truly was. She had her routines, her early morning drives, her son buckled safely in the back seat. Her world revolved around teaching and motherhood, not the tangled emotions of people she'd already left behind. But jealousy is a fire that doesn't burn out easily. It smolders, it consumes, and sometimes, it explodes. Racheal King's life was about to collide with forces she couldn't see coming, forces that had already decided her fate long before that April morning. The story of every tragedy has its whispers, the faint signals that something is wrong, long before the breaking point. With Racheal King, those red flags were there, not always visible, not always understood, but present all the same. Behind the scenes of her quiet life, resentment was quietly taking root. What should have ended as nothing more than a failed relationship refused to stay buried. Julie Jean, the other woman in the tangled triangle, seemed unwilling to let go. To friends and family, her bitterness may have looked like heartbreak, but beneath it, something far more sinister was taking shape. Jealousy is rarely logical. It feeds on comparisons, on imagined slights, on the haunting thought that someone else is living the life you believe should be yours. For Julie, Racheal represented exactly that, stability, respect, and the love of a man who no longer wanted her. And then there was Racheal King. A man whose life had already been steeped in violence, a man prosecutors would later describe as dangerous and volatile. His name appeared in police reports connected to other crimes, his history filled with moments of aggression. In him, Julie seemed to find the perfect storm, someone who could turn her simmering hatred into action. Technology, too, would later expose just how far this fixation went. Texts, phone records, and searches hinted at plotting, at planning, at conversations that blurred the line between angry words and deadly intent. Meanwhile, Racheal continued her life unaware. She woke early, prepared her son for school, and drove the familiar route to Dunkin Donuts, never knowing she was being watched. Investigators would later piece together the surveillance footage, the suspect vehicle following, circling, lurking, like a predator tracking its prey. To outsiders, these were just cars passing on busy streets. To those who knew the truth, it was stalking in plain sight. Even before the murder, there were signs. Julie had allegedly reached out, sending messages that revealed the depth of her anger. There were warnings that she couldn't move on, that she resented Rachel's place in the world. And in Alhakim, she had the means to transform obsession into execution. All of these fragments, the bitterness, the history of violence, the late-night conversations, were puzzle pieces no one connected in time. Each one was a warning that danger was moving closer. But hindsight is always clearer than the present. At the time, Racheal seemed safe. She had her job, her son, her community. There was no way to know that two people were already plotting to take it all away. And so the red flags waved quietly in the background, unseen, unheeded, and unstoppable, until the morning when they would finally erupt into violence. April 11, 2023. It was an ordinary Tuesday in Cheltenham Township, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. The sun had barely risen when Racheal King steered her silver Ford Edge into the familiar drive-thru of a Dunkin Donuts. Her son sat quietly in the back seat, strapped in for the morning ride to school. The routine was comforting, predictable. A mother, a child, a stop for coffee, the kind of small ritual that anchors daily life. But on that morning, someone else was waiting. A silver Mercury Sable had been spotted on surveillance cameras trailing her route. To anyone else, it looked like just another car blending into traffic. But investigators would later prove it was no coincidence. The driver was following her, shadowing her, hunting her. As Rachel's car pulled into line, brake lights glowing in the dawn haze, the silver sedan slipped into the lot. It was the moment the planning met the execution. The gunman stepped out. The weapon in his hand wasn't registered, wasn't traceable, a ghost gun, assembled from parts, built for one purpose, to kill without leaving a trail. In a chillingly calm motion, he approached the driver's side of Rachel's car. She had no time to react, no time to plead, no chance to defend herself. The first shot cracked through the still morning air. Witnesses would later say it sounded sharp, out of place, but before they could process it, more followed. Multiple rounds tore through the driver's side window, striking Racheal as her son watched in horror from the back seat. The boy could do nothing but sit frozen, trapped between disbelief and terror. In an instant, the woman who had spent her life teaching, guiding, and raising her son was gone. Her car lurched forward, nudging the vehicle ahead in line. Coffee orders halted, customers screamed, and chaos erupted. The shooter turned back, slipped into the waiting sedan, and vanished into the streets of Philadelphia. To anyone arriving moments later, it looked like madness: a mother's body slumped over the wheel, her child in shock, a drive-thru turned into a crime scene. Police were called immediately. The Dunkin parking lot, normally filled with commuters rushing for their morning fix, became a locked-down homicide scene. Yellow tape stretched across asphalt. Detectives marked shell casings scattered near the car. Shaken witnesses whispered to each other in disbelief. But the most haunting image remained that of Rachel's son, forced to sit beside his mother's lifeless body, a silent witness to brutality no child should ever endure. This was no random act of violence. It was targeted, calculated, executed with precision and intent. And as investigators began piecing together what happened, it became clear, this was more than murder. This was an execution born of obsession and jealousy, carried out in broad daylight with chilling indifference. The murder of Racheal King had been set in motion long before that April morning, and the hunt for her killer was only just beginning. In the minutes after the shooting, the silver Mercury Sable was nothing more than another car speeding through Philadelphia's early morning traffic. To the killer and the woman accused of orchestrating it all, the plan had been simple: get in, pull the trigger, and disappear. No one would connect them. No one would prove it. But killers almost always leave a trail. The first cracks in their cover-up came from the eyes in the sky. Surveillance cameras, mounted on stores, gas stations, and traffic lights, recorded more than just daily life. They captured a predator stalking his victim. Investigators retraced Racheal King's final drive, frame by frame. They saw the silver Mercury shadowing her Ford Edge, following her to Dunkin, pulling into the lot at almost the same time. It wasn't coincidence. It was premeditation captured in pixels. Then came the shell casings. Ballistics experts matched them to a ghost gun, a firearm built from parts, without serial numbers, impossible to trace back to a store. But while the weapon itself could vanish, digital evidence could not. On the phone of Racheal King, the suspected shooter, investigators uncovered photographs of ghost guns identical to the one used to kill Racheal. In one image, the weapon rested on his lap. In another, it was displayed like a trophy. The car was the next link. The Mercury Sable wasn't just seen once. Surveillance showed it near the scene of another shooting days before Racheal's murder, a killing on Broad Street, committed with the very same weapon. The pattern was undeniable. When police attempted to stop the Sable, King fled, crashing and abandoning the vehicle before being taken into custody. Inside, investigators recovered evidence tying him not only to Racheal's murder but to the earlier killing. But the question remained, why? Why target a schoolteacher, a mother, a woman with no ties to gang wars or drug rivalries? That's where the digital paper trail led detectives to Julie Jean. Through phone records and witness testimony, prosecutors would later argue that Julie had orchestrated the crime, fueled by jealousy over Racheal's past relationship with a man they both knew. What began as an affair had soured into obsession, and that obsession had turned into a contract for murder. Texts and calls between Julie and Racheal painted the picture: she wanted Racheal gone, and he was willing to do it. The drive-thru execution wasn't random, it was a hit, born from spite and carried out in front of a child. By the time detectives pieced it all together, the illusion of a clean getaway had collapsed. The silver car, the ghost gun, the digital footprints, every thread led back to King and Jean. The cover-up had failed. And with the arrests, the next chapter of this tragedy would move from the streets to the courtroom. When the courtroom doors opened, the atmosphere was thick with grief and anger. On one side sat the family of Racheal King, her parents, her son, her loved ones, forced to relive the horror of April 11, 2023, through photographs, surveillance footage, and testimony. On the other sat the accused, Racheal King, the alleged gunman, and Julie Jean, the woman prosecutors claimed had orchestrated the killing. The case was brutal in its simplicity. The prosecution laid out the timeline like a grim roadmap. Surveillance video of the silver Mercury trailing Racheal's car. The Dunkin Donuts footage showing the ambush. The ghost gun tied to the shooting. The digital trail of calls and messages between Julie and Racheal. Each piece was damning on its own. Together, they painted a picture too clear to ignore. This was not random, this was not mistaken identity. It was a targeted execution. King's defense tried to push back, arguing there was no definitive proof he was the shooter. They highlighted gaps in the footage, questioned the reliability of digital evidence, and leaned heavily on the idea that ghost guns are common and untraceable. But the images on his phone, the weapon on his lap, the vehicle he fled from, were almost impossible to explain away. Julie Jean's defense was even more fragile. Prosecutors pointed to the obsessive jealousy, the phone records tying her to King, the motive born of rage at Racheal's past with the man they had both been romantically involved with. They argued she hadn't just wished harm upon Racheal, she had engineered it. The jury listened as forensic experts, detectives, and tearful witnesses testified. They saw the evidence. They heard about the child in the back seat, watching his mother's murder play out in real time. And with each passing day, the weight of the case grew heavier. For Racheal's family, the trial was agony. Every detail was a wound reopened. Every piece of evidence another reminder of what had been stolen. But they sat through it, waiting for justice. When the verdicts came, they were met with silence, the kind of silence that only falls when a room is holding its breath. King, the triggerman, faced charges of first-degree murder. Jean, the alleged mastermind, faced conspiracy and related charges. The prosecution pushed hard for the maximum penalty, with Racheal's family even calling for the death sentence. Whether that ultimate punishment would be imposed remained uncertain, but what was clear was this: the justice system had no doubt who was responsible for ending Racheal's life. For Julie and Zach Key, the courtroom was the end of their illusion of control. For Racheal's family, it was the beginning of a lifetime sentence of their own, living without her. Sentencing loomed like a shadow, a grim reminder that in cases like this, no punishment can ever equal the loss. Her life was defined by care, for her students, for her son, for the future she believed in. But her death was defined by cruelty, by the selfishness of those who chose revenge over healing, destruction over letting go. The courtroom may have delivered justice, but justice is not resurrection. No sentence, no verdict, no punishment can give an 11-year-old boy his mother back. No ruling can silence the memory of gunshots in a drive-thru, or erase the image of a beloved teacher slumped over her steering wheel. What lingers most is the ordinary nature of it all. A morning routine, a school run, a stop for coffee, transformed into a nightmare in seconds. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth: the darkest acts often happen in the most familiar places. Racheal King's story reminds us that love and obsession are separated by the thinnest of lines. And when jealousy is left to fester, it can consume not just the jealous, but everyone caught in its orbit. As we leave this story, the questions remain. How do we prevent tragedies born of obsession before they erupt? How do we protect the innocent from those who see them only as obstacles to be erased? And what does true justice look like, when the greatest loss can never be repaired? Racheal King's name should not be remembered only for the way she died, but for the life she lived, as a teacher, a mother, a woman who gave everything to others. Her story is a warning, a tragedy, and a call to never underestimate the destructive power of jealousy. If you've been moved by this story, I ask you to keep Racheal's family in your thoughts. And if you want to see more stories like this, told with care and detail, please like this video, share it, subscribe to Dark Matters True Crime, and turn on notifications so you never miss when we dive deep into another case. Because behind every crime is a story. And behind every story is a truth that matters.